Good morning, YouTube. So I wanted to wrap up a few loose ends on this pi-top project here. So one change I've made is I had to go to a different USB to M2 SATA adapter. So originally I used a part from QNINE, and that one worked for about a month, and then one day it just quit mounting the SSD. I don't know what went wrong with it. So I picked up this other one. This one was labeled Tanbin. And I put links to both of these in an earlier video, and I'll put those down in the video description. So this one is a little bit different, and actually I think it works a little better. One is it puts the SSD on the bottom side. The only difference is it's got this voltage regulator here, and that sticks up a little bit higher. It's a thicker chip. And one of the problems you run into is there's a lip underneath the keyboard slide here, and when you run that up, it just hits that corner of that chip. Sometimes you can hear it hit right there, and you can see how it pushed the board over. So what you have to do is, when you slide it up, kind of keep a finger on the SSD just to keep it down, but you can't really go down any farther because it hits this proto board. So this is what's called the pi-top proto board. So one advantage of this adapter versus the QNINE is on the QNINE I had to grind a little tiny bit, maybe about a millimeter off the corner of the speaker. So you can see right in there I had to grind just a corner off of that. This Tanbin board is a little bit shorter. This one has been working fine for many months, and I haven't had any problems with it. But like I say, it can't go down any farther because of this proto board, and you need that there if you want to run the speaker, because you need to space the speaker out far enough because the speaker is taller. And speaking of the speaker, I finally got it to work. So I'll show you what I had to do in the software to get the speaker to work with BerryBoot off of the SSD. One problem with the speaker, and then this is what's called the pi-top Proto Plus. So this is more of a breadboard versus this one that's just a bare circuit board. I think they're pretty similar parts. They have the GPIO header along the top, and then have all the pins broken out. So the idea is you could maybe put a circuit in here and hook up to GPIO pins. And this Proto Plus board is set up very similar, except it's a breadboard where you can just shove wires in. You don't have to do any soldering. The one difference, though, with this board is if we flip it over, I don't know if you can see it right there, but that's an AT-Tiny20 microcontroller, and I'm not sure what it's there for, but it's hooked up to these 6 pins here, and it's labeled ADC. I can't find any information on this particular board. They talk about the Proto, there's the speaker, they also have a newer speaker called the Pulse, which has a speaker plus an RGB LED array. I think the Pulse speaker is a little bit different than this one, in that on the Pulse speaker there's a switch on the speaker, and you can tell the speaker to do left or right channel, so you could put 2 of those Pulse speakers in here and actually have stereo speaker. Of course, you always have the option you could do Bluetooth off of the Raspberry Pi. If you slide this unit in, the speaker no longer works. And I've tried also, thinking that maybe the speaker doesn't like having anything plugged into it, I put the speaker on the back side, slid this into here, and then the speaker in over here. And if you have this board plugged in, the speaker stops working. So there must be something with this little chip here. I don't know if I need additional drivers for this board. So for now, I'm just going to leave it unplugged. I'll leave it in here, and if I need to do some development work, I can plug it in and I just won't have a speaker. So let's close this up and we'll boot the thing up, and I'll show you what the fixes I had to do in the config.txt file for BerryBoot. Okay, let's boot it up here. So now we're mounting the SSD, and let me stop the auto boot. So you can see here I've got quite a few operating systems loaded. Now some of these, like Octopi, doesn't really do anything, but I've got OpenELEC and Kodi. I've also got the OSMC version. Then I have pi-top Polaris, Raspbian, Stretch Desktop, and then there's the one with the emulator built in, QEMU, RetroPie, Ubuntu. So there's probably about 10 operating systems in there, and they all seem to work. And I'll show you a little bit later in the video. We'll look at where all of these came from. Let's go to the Edit menu first, and I'll show you the config.txt file. So we go here to Edit Config. So what I did, I found this DT param audio on doesn't seem to affect anything. So I think I have that back on. And then down here at the bottom, this is where I made more changes. So I have the I2C1 on. There's also a baud rate setting. And then there's some more parameters. And then the bottom one here is this HDMI_drive equals 2. And that one's needed because the audio for the speaker comes from the HDMI port. The volume control for the speaker is the I2C interface. The HDMI drive equal 2 forces this into HDMI compatibility mode versus DVI compatibility mode. Not sure what the difference is, but that was the key there. So we just do we can do a cancel there, and then we can just boot into the Polaris or pi-topOS. Yeah, so this is again the main desktop here, and what we can do first is let's check out the speaker here. So if you go down, you've got sound, and you can see it's got HDMI selected, and that's the source of the audio. And there you can hear. The volume control is I2C. So you need to have the parameters in there for the I2C has to be enabled to get the volume to work. But the sound comes out of the HDMI port. I've got my mouse here, but it doesn't work. And I've noticed there's no Bluetooth on the status bar, whatever you want to call it. But if you go over here and exit this pi-top dashboard, now you have Bluetooth and the mouse works. So for some reason the pi-top dashboard doesn't turn on Bluetooth. You might notice over here on the side I've got a kind of elaborate system status bar. If there's any interest, I can walk you through how I set this up. I used some setup information from Don at Nova Spirit Tech, and he has a really great video on how to set this up. I customized it a little bit. Kind of hard to see with this background, but if there's interest, I can show you how I set that up. And I want to go here to my boot partition, and here's config.txt. This is the pi-topOS version of config.txt. There's the DT param settings. So it says enable optional hardware interfaces. And then the other one is right here, this HDMI drive equal 2. It says force HDMI mode rather than DVI. This can make audio work on a computer monitor mode. These are the settings from the pi-top config.txt. It gets a little confusing because when you boot off of the SD card into BerryBoot, the SSD is mounted as /dev/SDA2. It's an external file system, but when you boot the SSD into the pi-topOS, the SD card is now mounted as an external file system. So if you go to your /media/pi folder, there's a BerryBoot folder. So the little lowercase BerryBoot is the actual root file system. And then if you go here, this is the boot partition. And this is the BerryBoot config.txt file. So that makes it easy to copy these things back and forth because you can access the SSD config.txt and the SD card config.txt. This was the really big help, was being able to see the BerryBoot config.txt. And then there's the other version, and you can switch back and forth between those two and copy and paste between them, and everything's really easy to work on at that point. So actually there's probably some more stuff in this file here that I might want to move over to the other file. But you can see I've got about 10 operating systems, and so far I haven't found any compatibility issues. So I think what I'm doing is going to work okay, but I just need to basically find all of these parameters that need to be enabled and just put them all into the BerryBoot file so that they're there for all of the operating systems. So yeah, everything seems to be working. Let's just click over here. I've got sound and video. I can go to Kodi, and I can come down here like live TV. And we can click on a channel there.
Questions asked. I don't care what the price is. I'm going to try this. When I get results like this, it's
So that works.
be sure to use.
So that works pretty good. Yeah, so let's switch over to the computer screen, and I'll show you where these operating systems came from, and I'll show you where the BerryBoot setup came from. So this is where I got the BerryBoot version 2.0 bootloader, or Universal Operating System Installer. I'll put links to this page and the other page in the video description. So right here is where you can download the images. So they have the single core image here, and then they have the quad core image right here. You download that, follow the directions, install it on an SD card. As it mentions, you can use BerryBoot on your SD card and then have multiple operating systems installed on that same SD card. And let's see, so it kind of walks you through how to install it, how to set it up. It's pretty easy. So this version includes some operating systems that you can download off the web, and I showed you that in an earlier video. Okay, and down here at the bottom there's a few tips here. One talks about creating this local repository on a Windows network share. So I wasn't able to get this to work, and I'll show you on the next website where it describes what the process that I used. I guess I also was a little confused by this. They talk about using an iSCSI setup or iSCSI network connection on something like a Synology NAS. So this is actually how to use your network share as your, quote, hard disk. So you could actually store your files on a network share and not actually have a built-in drive in your Raspberry Pi system. So this would be another option instead of using, like I am, an SSD connected to a USB port, boot up on the SD card, and then you would run your operating system from the network. So that's another option there. But let me show you this second page here. So this is the BerryServer page. Again, I'll put a link to this in the video description. But this is the site run by Alex Goldscheit. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But he has a lot of OS images set up for BerryBoot. There are over 250 here. I haven't counted them all, but there's 11 pages, and there's about 25 OSs on each page. This goes up to 11. The nice thing is he's got these all broken down by the variety of the operating system. So he has his latest updates. There's Arch Linux, Debian Linux, Ubuntu and flavors. There's CentOS, Fedora. Under Learning here, this is where I found the pi-topOS. Multimedia, here's all your OpenELEC, LibreELEC, Media Center, OSMC, there's Plex. So yeah, lots of different things, networking, utilities, all of that. And then if you come over here on his how-to guides, he just pulls these off the official websites and then just packages them up to work with BerryBoot. So that's that how-to guide. And then he also has how to install these images. Since I've downloaded my copies, he's changed to using gzip. So you get a zip file now instead of a compressed tar file. And then copy that. He mentions copying it to a FAT32 formatted USB device, and that's what I did. I showed you in the last video. You click on Add OS and then Install from USB stick. Here's my folder where I put all my files. I collected them all here and then copied them over to a USB thumb drive and then stuck that into the pi-top. So that's basically how you get these images. So yeah, if you have any questions, I'm by no means an expert, but I'll try to either answer your question or point you in the right direction. And as always, thanks for watching.